Politics show, where we look at policies, political developments, the economy, and various issues around investments as it affects the populace. Today is a very interesting day, Thursday, July 16, 2020. We're looking at electricity supply, which of course concerns you and me. In Nigeria, we've continued to have this challenge of electricity for all the population, at least over 80% of the population. And how can we really address those challenges? And so today we're looking at addressing the critical issues in Nigeria's electricity supply industry, looking at the activities also of a private sector-led organization that has continued to drive reforms in the country, the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. We meet to discuss the developments around addressing the issues in the NESI, as we like to call it, is Ms. Hasana Aliyu. She is an associate with the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Nice to have you on the show, Hasana.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So it's really interesting having this discussion. I know how electricity is very important, particularly for production, for activities across the economy. And let's first begin with the issues around the 7 pillars based on the NESI group, what you've developed as a framework. There are 7 pillars for creating a successful electricity supply industry across board in the country. Let me just look at that. When you want to achieve electricity supply markets in any economy or economies like Nigeria, there are 7 very key pillars. So the first is independent urban enumeration and revenue tracking. The second is the tariff structure overhaul plus cost-reflective tariff, which of course is what Nigeria is currently grappling with. Effective regulation and governance, contract and performance alignment, tackling the metering challenge, which is something that's been like a legacy issue in Nigeria. Then achieving sustained infrastructure growth and also standardizing industry data, just to give us additional insight into these 7 pillars and how critical they are and where we are in terms of addressing those issues in Nigeria.
Okay, so just to give a background about how these pillars came about. So the NESG, in their capacity as a think tank that facilitates private public sector dialogue. So they put together a roundtable which invited stakeholders from the Nigerian electricity supply industry, invited them to come for an open discussion on the issues that are plaguing the sector, preventing the sector from growing and from being self-sustaining and financially viable. So based on these discussions, the issues were identified, they were segmented, distilled into the core issues. And then these 7 pillars were designed within a framework that was meant for addressing the issues in the Nigerian electricity supply industry. The 7 pillars are to address the issues, turn the sector around from one that is in financial crisis into a sector that is viable and that is growing. So if we start with the first pillar, which is independent urban enumeration, and the idea behind that pillar is, in order for the NESI to truly understand its revenue requirements and to be able to plan investment and growth, it needs to know how many electricity consumers there are on the network. So have a true measure of how many electricity customers we have in Nigeria. And if you have these independent enumerations conducted, then you will know who the customers are, where they're located. This will enable you to have a better idea for planning for infrastructure growth, the capacity required to electrify 100% of Nigerians. So that was the idea behind the first pillar. And once you know how many people you need to electrify, you know the investment that you need to grow the network, then you can accurately calculate the revenue sector needs for everybody to be able to recover their costs, right from the gas suppliers to the distributors. And then with the second pillar, opening up the metering space. Right now, it's the mandate of either the distribution company or the licensed meter asset providers. They are the only ones right now who are allowed to procure or manufacture and install meters for customers. The current situation we have, over 60% of electricity customers, currently registered electricity customers, do not have meters, which means they are subjected to estimated billing, a situation that has caused a lot of controversy and a lot of frustration amongst customers. So the pillar is recommending that the space is opened up to any Nigerian who has the capacity and the capability to either import or to manufacture the meters. And if they register with NERC, NERC will do the necessary due diligence to make sure that they are capable, they have the capacity. So once they're registered, any Nigerian should be allowed to either import these meters or to manufacture these meters and to sell these meters. And then the second part of that recommendation is that the landlords, the people who own the buildings, the landlords, the homeowners, it should be their responsibility to buy the meters. So if you have a property, you buy the meter, and then at the point you need a connection to the network, you call the disco and ask them to come and install the meter. So once you procure your own meter, it will still remain the mandate of the disco or the MAP to come and install it, to maintain it, and to certify it. So this we anticipate will progress the metering of customers at a rapid pace, unlike the current situation where it's very slow progress when it comes to metering of electricity customers. And the third pillar, the overhaul of the tariff. Obviously, I think many people are aware of the tariff issues, the illiquidity in the sector. And this is due to a tariff that is not functioning as it should and is unable to cover the cost of the players in the sector. So we recommend that the tariff methodology is simplified. Any parameter that is used to calculate the tariff that is not verifiable or accurately measurable should not be used as a parameter for calculating the tariff. So if we take one parameter, which is the technical and commercial losses in the system, this is a parameter that is not easily unverifiably measured. So you get different values for people telling you what the losses are in the system. And so we recommend that this is a parameter that should not be used in calculating the tariff if you can't accurately measure it. And also the classification of customers should be simplified into two tariff structures. You have the lifeline and peri-urban tariff class, which is probably the class of people who are financially burdened by electricity payments. And then you have the second class, which are the commercial customers, who are the more demanding customers who require the power, who are able to pay for the power. So the commercial class should definitely be a cost-reflective tariff class, and it might be calculated in a way where the commercial is subsidizing the lifeline and the peri-urban. So everybody is managing to cover their costs, and all the customers are managed to afford their electricity bills. Sustained infrastructure growth. Sorry?
Yeah, I was just about to ask you around that aspect in terms of the tariff methodology, simplifying it. Is that being taken on board by the NERC and the Ministry of Power? Because we're looking at, initially it was supposed to be July 1st, but we're still looking around implementing these cost-reflective tariff measures.
So it's an ongoing discussion. This diagnostic framework was created in the beginning part of this year, and the NESG is just beginning the process of engaging stakeholders on this framework. So the process is starting, the engagement is beginning, and the idea is to present these solutions to the relevant stakeholders for their consideration and, if necessary, for their adoption.
Okay, we were talking about sustained infrastructure growth, if you can continue on that.
So yes, that's the fourth pillar, sustained infrastructure growth. One of the major issues with the power sector right now is the lack of funding into the network to improve the quality of the network and to expand the network. And one of the reasons is because due to the financial situation, a lot of the players in the sector, particularly the distribution companies, are unable to access loans and access funding. And so one of the recommendations in this area is that the powers that be, such as the CBN, restructure some of these loans, make them longer term, lower interest rates, allow commercial banks to loan to the sector and be able to collect their loans on a equal basis with the Nigerian Electricity Stabilization Fund, which is a CBN loan. So the CBN loan is the priority repayment that the distribution companies currently make. So we're recommending that if the banks are allowed to loan to the sector, and they should be allowed to collect on these loans on an equal footing with the CBN loans. So generally just to restructure these loans so they're longer term, lower interest, and opening up the abilities of the players in the sector to access further loans, which will be used to invest in improving the network. effective governance of the sector. Obviously, we all know the regulator of the sector is the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission.
Yeah.
We have instances where we have seen where the NERC has not been allowed to independently operate and govern the sector. There has been interference, there has been political interference. And one of the reasons why we find ourselves in this current situation where there is financial crisis in the sector is because they have not been allowed to implement the MITRE methodology, which requires that once the tariff is reviewed, if it needs to be increased, it needs to be increased. As you mentioned before, there was viewpoint increase, and it was the National Assembly decided that this was not the right time to do that. So in a situation where you have a regulator that is not allowed to perform their mandate, then it causes chaos in the sector. So players know that they can basically get away with stuff, and if the regulator is impotent to regulate and govern them, then it doesn't bode well for investment because it increases the risk of the sector. The sixth pillar is standardized industry data, and this basically is recommending that power sector integrated information system is designed and implemented. And so all the data for the sector is recorded on the system, is registered on the system, and the system will be managed by the NERC. So you have transparency of data, you can have verifiable data, and without data, you can't really plan, you can't make projections, and you can't make investment. So it's key that we have sanitized, verifiable data for the sector. And lastly, we have contract performance alignment. And this basically is just, you have several contracts that govern the relationship between players in the sector, and they just need to align. So whatever contract you're signing with generation, it needs to align with the transmission contract and align with the generation distribution contract. So if wherever the demand is, so if you have the power purchase contract, the financial clauses all need to line up. So you know that wherever there's a supply, there is a corridor to evacuate the supply, and there is a demand at the end of the corridor that will sell the supply and recoup the investments. So that's a general summary of these 7 pillars that is designed by us at the NESG and recommended for implementation in the sector.
Thank you very much for that insight, Hassan. I mean, particularly the one that you said, the tariff methodology needs to be simplified. I like that because it helps for customers to continue to engage and believe that the system works effectively. And that classification between lifeline, urban, and the commercial ones that really need it, it's very critical. And we hope that these are all integrated into the plan when it's fully taken up. But let's look at issues responsible for NESG's lack of improvement over the decades, because this has been something that has been designed right from when the National Electric Power Authority was privatized during the Obasanjo administration, the Power Holding Company of Nigeria, and then from PHCN, we now saw that very historic moment, 2013, when the administration of President Goodluck Jonathan now privatized it to the level of distribution companies and generation companies. And over time, we're still seeing this challenge of electricity. I mean, in your report, what struck me was that from African Development Bank, we've had over 5 trillion naira being spent on alternative generation of power supply in Africa. That is really incredible, and that is something that Nigeria, in terms of the power sector, has to address, because so much funds goes to the generators and to other alternative sources when we can leverage a robust framework to provide power for everyone.
So, I mean, to that last point about the size of the self-generation market, I think the interesting thing about having your own generator is you have control and you have trust. So you are paying, you know that you're paying the right price for your fuel, you are turning on your generator and you are paying for what you're consuming. And you have
being depleted is affected. I mean, we had the most sufficient robust power framework.
So that is exactly the point. If the electricity customers had trust in the network, then nobody would revert to self-generation. I mean, self-generation is more expensive than the grid. It's noisy, it's polluting. So it comes to a point, the point of it is that the service that is provided from the grid has to be comparable to the service you get when you self-generate. And I think this is one of the ideas that the regulator is coming around to. And that is one of the reasons why this new increase in tariff is a bit different from the normal increase. In the past, the tariff has just been increased based on the fact that the parameters that govern the tariff have changed. Foreign exchange rate has changed, inflation has gone up, the cost of fuel is increased. So based on these parameters, it means that the tariff has to increase. And it had nothing to do with the service level that the players were offering. In this new increase, they have turned that around and they have predicated this increase on service level. So there are different tariff bands, and the highest tariff band would be for the higher service level. So if you can guarantee your customers a minimum of 22 hours of power every day, then you can charge them a high, well, not a high tariff, a more cost-reflective tariff. So the sector is coming around to this idea that yes, it's really about the service now. Obviously, it is critical that any private investor who is coming into the sector needs to have confidence that whatever they invest, they will be able to recoup. That means there needs to be enough revenue in the sector to cover everybody's costs and allow a reasonable return on investment. So that is one side of it. At the same time, you cannot just continually be charging for a service that is not there. So the regulator has recognized this, and this new tariff increase has come in a framework that requires the level of service to be side by side with the cost of the tariff.
Yeah, I was going to ask, in terms of the initiatives, for example, obviously the Vice President looking at the willing buyer, willing seller, you just mentioned something. Some estates now, some estates like housing estates have developed ways of partnering with discos to get supply of electricity. Some of them have 20, 22 hours. Based on that, like you said, they pay more, they just agree. Those initiatives are beginning to create value. Even industrial layouts, hotels, major consumers of electricity are now taking advantage of those plans to engage discos to strategize and agree on how to get more electricity that they'll pay for. Are those initiatives not helping, again, to build value into the system and create even confidence for investors who want to come in?
Yeah, so definitely they are. But again, we come back to this issue of infrastructure. So in order for you to be able to guarantee this service level, you have to have the infrastructure. The infrastructure has to be in a good condition, and that requires investment. And the distribution companies in particular are finding it very hard to access investment into their network. So with one of the recommendations of the pillar was to try and make it easier for players in the sector to access loans, and that is by restructuring the loans that already exist in the sector. So if these loans are restructured, then it opens up further facilities that these players can access. They can pump that into the network, improve the network, and then they can start guaranteed. And because the important thing to note is you have to have an agreement with a customer, and the agreement is guaranteed a certain service level. And if you don't meet up, there will be consequences. So a lot of players will be reluctant to guarantee a service level that they have the control over, or they don't have the power to implement. So it's critical. Investment is critical. It's critical.
Yeah. You've had experience in infrastructure, even overseas, so you would understand those challenges we face in terms of laying out those infrastructure. I've talked to one or two investors in the past sector, and they highlighted how much they even spent, particularly in the GENCOs, to upgrade those GENCOs to levels that can generate a lot to support the discos. For example, the ones in Egbin power plant in Ikorodu and the ones in Ughelli. Really, really huge investments were made there initially to upgrade them, to transform the whole infrastructure there to the levels. But when we look at the liquidity faced by discos, like you said, in the electricity value chain, apart from constructing these loans, because most banks have been exposed to power companies, and part of it was that it's maybe long-term in terms of the revenue. Initially, some would think that you will get the whole revenue in 1 or 2, 3 years, but these investments may get long-term, because to get people to pay, to get metering and all those processes, sometimes could be very demanding and cause for patience. So in terms of the liquidity disclosed face and the challenge in the electricity value chain. What have you heard from industry players, and how are they going to address this? And is the CBN now taking on board those strategies to begin to look at restructuring loans, as you're saying?
Obviously, this is a conversation that has been ongoing for a long time, and as I mentioned earlier, this framework was recently designed, and we at the NESG are in the process of engaging stakeholders to make these recommendations and how these issues can be dealt with. Yeah. But I mean, I think in terms of how the industry players, I mean, I think the issue is, as you mentioned, is that when you invest in this sector, you have to be patient. And I think one of the reasons why we find ourselves in the position that we find ourselves right now in the sector is that people underestimated the condition of the sector. Yeah. People underestimated how bad the situation was when they first came in to privatize, to invest. They were maybe they were not giving the true picture. They underestimated the loss levels in the sector. They underestimated the condition of the network. They underestimated the attitude, shall we say, of customers. And I mean, remembering that when the power sector was under government control, a lot of people believed that, well, it's this government providing us with this service, so the service is free. And when government was in control, even if you didn't pay your bill, they would still supply you. So that engendered this attitude that, oh, this is a free social service from the government. And now when it's come over to private sector, I mean, till today, we are still calling it NEPA. No, people are not taking in the idea that these are now private service providers, and a private service provider will require you to pay for the service that they're providing. So it's just many issues that I think were underestimated in the whole privatization. And now, I mean, at this point, we are seeing the true picture. And the picture that we had at privatization in 2013 is an entirely different picture than we have today. The indices have gotten worse. The issues are getting bigger. And so that's why the NESG felt it was necessary to gather the stakeholders to dimension the problem and come up with realistic solutions that have set time frame for implementation and set outcomes to grow the sector, stabilize it, make it self-sustaining and financially viable. So government no longer has to continue providing financial intervention to keep the sector running.
Yeah, I was going to ask you in terms of, we'll get to that, but in terms of the transmission sector or segment, one of the key investors was even suggesting in the forum where other players were, that was a former Minister of Power, Professor Kingsley Nebo, who was Minister of Power then in the previous administration. He was putting it to the minister that if it was possible to have transmission co-owned by GENCOs, who would be able to take further responsibility, because government's holding on the transmission segment is massive and huge. And we've had dimensions around even Manitoba, Canada, and other developments around it. And we've seen changes recently in leadership and all that, which could be a concern sometimes in investors. So what is the next you think around this area? I mean, transmission too, because it's very critical.
I mean, I think this is a question that has been asked many times, discussion that keep on being had, but the bottom line, as far as government is concerned, that is transmission is, firstly, it's a subsector of the industry that requires a huge amount of funding. And I guess government would be the best person to provide those funds. They probably feel it's something beyond the private sector. Secondly, it's a security issue. They tell us that it's part of national security to ensure that the transmission grid is secure. And so that's one of the reasons why it was kept under government control. I mean, I think if the government is adamant that the transmission subsector needs to remain under their control, there are other ways that they can look to making it more efficient. And one of those ways is to regionalize the transmission grid. Rather than having one transmission grid that just draws thousands of kilometers of lines from one end of the country to the other, you can have regional grids that are interconnected to one another. So even if you have a system collapse in one zone, it shouldn't affect another zone, because you can disconnect from that zone and the regionalized grid will carry on operating. So, I mean, there are ways to make it more manageable and more efficient. But in terms of privatizing, I mean, and now we see that the NERC have separated the transmission company into the operations and the grid, the marketing end. So it's now two separate companies, even though they are still both owned by the government. At least their mandate is clearly delineated, and they are operating. They will be operating independently going forward. So we'll see how that improves or otherwise things in the sector.
And Hasana, the issue of energy laws in the country, what is the group looking at around that? Because, for example, for my state, we have the Ibom power plant where we try to generate independent power plant, and we like to connect to people even beyond the national grid. Even in there was a time like Bayelsa has its power plant. Even Lagos has power plant that are powering even for the waterworks and the offices, major Alausa area and all that, and states would like to continue to leverage that area. Is there any time for us to look at our energy laws, reforming them to allow states to leverage and unlock opportunities in the sector?
I mean, definitely, I think, yeah, when we speak about the pillar, which is governance and regulation, that is part of the conversation, that we need to review these regulations and analyze if they're effective enough, or if they could be made more effective, or if they're obsolete, or if new regulations need to be done. This is a conversation that is being had. And I mean, I think that there are currently existing regulations that could help localize power supply a bit more. You have the embedded generation regulations. So if you have these power plants within states, these power plants don't have to connect to the entire grid. They can connect to the local distribution network. But this is a conversation that needs to be going on between the power plant owner and the distribution company. And again, it comes down to being able to guarantee payment for this investment. If I'm investing in this power plant, I need to make sure that I'm going to recoup my investment. And so that's why it's an interconnected chain. And if one part of the chain is not working, it's going to affect the entire chain. So we have to address all the issues. We can't be addressing issues in isolation, because they're not isolated. All these issues are connected, and they need to make sense for the entire value chain, for the value chain to work. So even if I have a plant that is willing to embed their supply into a distribution network, they need to have confidence that the contract they sign with the distribution will be sacrosanct. These contracts will be honored, and if they're not honored, they would have recourse to deal with these non-compliance. And that comes to governance of the sector again. We have to ensure that there is good governance in this sector, so players are confident that their risk are adequately mitigated, and they have instruments to deal with any issues that crop up.
Just in 1 or 2 minutes, just tell us about the NESG, the framework you've developed, these solutions, very interesting ones, how the whole process came up. And I mean, it's an interesting thing NESG is doing, looking at how to provide solutions, not just raising issues. What did it entail in terms of the stakeholder engagement and the whole process? I must say that it's a great job the NESG has done to provide advisory and solutions to the electricity supply chain in the country.
So yeah, I mean, here at the NESG, the mandate, the way the NESG works, they have different policy commission, and each policy commission is focused on a specific sector of the Nigerian economy. And the overarching objective is to grow Nigeria's economy, to reform it, and to diversify it. So the overarching objective is to have a Nigerian economy that is working, growing sustainably. So one of the policy commissions is energy. Everybody recognizes for us to have a better economy, we have to have reliable, steady power that can power our economy. So based on this notion that, yes, this is a critical sector for growing the economy, so the NESG has been working not just on this framework. For years now, the NESG has been engaging private and public stakeholders on power issues. As the situation continued to deteriorate, the NESG thought it is necessary to convene stakeholders to have a deep dialogue to truly dimension the issues. And this started in October 2018. The NESG sent out position papers asking key relevant stakeholders to address the problems that they find with the sector, problems they're facing, and to put it down so they can be analyzed, they can be discussed, and the way forward to overcome them can be designed. So after all the issues were dimensioned, stakeholders sat down, they discussed them, they condensed them, and then they came up with ways that we can come around them. And this is looking at the problem holistically. As I said before, if you're not looking at the holistic solution, if you're looking at small issues here and there, it's not going to solve the issue. You need to have a holistic view of what is impeding this sector. And so that's what we at the NESG were. The objective was to understand the problem of the entire sector, the critical problems, and basically come up with a framework that had people responsible. And the key thing here is you can have a solution, but if you're not implementing the solution, then what's the point? So the framework was designed to have the solutions and the responsible parties who would implement the solution, and the time frame within which each solution has to be implemented, and the expected outcomes. So we will implement in 3 phases over a period of 5 to 6 years. We will expect that at the end of all that, we have a stable, self-sustaining, financially viable, growing Nigerian power sector.
So in additional 1 or 2 minutes, what would you be saying as 2 or 3 bullet points should be done going forward now that would unlock this power sector, make it, customer friendly, make it investor friendly, and also make it a robust policy environment that people can say, yes, over 50 years since Nigeria has been grappling with power, finally we're having a headway.
So number 1, governance. Governance is key. Governance is what will dictate the direction of the sector and encourage investment and reduce the risk to investment. So the governance is key. The regulator must be allowed to operate its mandate independently and without interference. So governance of the sector is a key aspect of stabilizing and growing the sector. Having an enumeration, not just an enumeration of customers and assessment of the network. Understanding the true picture of the network, the condition of the network, the extent of the capacity of the network, the customers on the network, and being able to accurately measure all these things so that you can develop verifiable, measurable sustainable growth plans to grow the capacity of the network in a sustainable way and to deliver investment plans that will be able to achieve this growth. And I think finally, the metering. Metering is, I think, very critical from the customer's point of view. If you want to bring the customer, if you want the customers to basically understand energy efficiency, to trust in the service, to trust in their service provider, I think metering is a key aspect of getting over a lot of the issues, especially the collection issues. It will also reduce, it will improve the operating efficiency, because right now, if you have customers who aren't metered, that means you have to employ a person to go to people's houses and collect payment. Whereas if you go fully automated, if you go cashless, in a situation like we had with this COVID, where people were stuck at home, who was going out collecting bills? You're putting your people at risk if they have to have these physical contact that is easily mitigated by automation. So meter the customers, meter the network, make everything as automated as possible, and it would improve the efficiency and the operationability of the sector.
Thank you very much, Hasana Aliyu. It was really nice listening to you speak on how we can address the issues around our national Nigerian electricity supply industry and the value chain. Indeed, governance, effective customer enumeration, and metering, those 3 are critical to unlock the potentials and create opportunities and build customer confidence, investor confidence, and an effective policy environment for power sector to work for everyone, which is the total goal of all what we're doing, even with the Nigeria Economic Survey Group and NESG. And just on a lighter note, looking to your CV, you've also had a good background in the rail. I mean, large-scale projects supporting even UK, which has one of the best rail systems in the globe. So we hope that the Minister of Transportation, which will need people like you, I mean, to provide that consultancy and support, because rail is one thing that has to come alive in the country, and we hope that we'll revive. But thank you for your insights.
But again, if we had a functional, reliable powered grid, we would have our rail powered by the grid, not powered by diesel. So you see, again, everything is connected.
So this all ties to infrastructure, the whole value chain of infrastructure.
The whole value chain, yeah.
Yeah, we hope to have you to speak on this in subsequent editions. But thank you once again for the time. Hasana Aliyu, Associate, Nigeria Economic Summit Group, were discussing with us on Nigeria's electricity supply chain and improving it for the power sector. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And that'll be all for the Economy and Politics show today. You can join our website, www.prochange.com, to watch our videos, read our news reports, and analysis. Join us by 10 a.m. for market review. We will look at developments in the financial and capital market as it relates to our economy. To come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice time and stay safe.